Greetings everybody, my name is David Bridger and I'm the Country Director for UNAIDS here in India. Firstly, my apologies that I can't be with you physically today, and apologies that I have to do a taped presentation, but let me just take you through what I hope is something that will be of interest. I think globally, regionally, and here in India, we do have a choice. There is a choice. We can act now to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. We can actively work to keep people living with HIV on treatment and healthy. We can accelerate efforts to reduce new infections substantially, and we can almost eradicate AIDS-related deaths. But to do so, we'll require firmer commitment by leaders to invest in effective programs that engage community, further reduce stigma and discrimination, and address sustainability and integration of the response. There is a pathway to ending AIDS, and we have a map. Are we bold enough to follow it and accelerate our progress? The data being used in the presentation is actually drawn from two global sources, two global publications that are available on our internet page. First of all is the 2024 Global AIDS Update published in July 24, entitled The Urgency of Now, AIDS at a Crossroads. This publication looks at where countries are in relation to all of the 2025 global targets, and it looks at those countries in respect to their 2023 data. The second publication is the 2024 World AIDS Day report published in December 24, Take the Rights Path. And this publication looks at the enabling environment, reminding us of the critical need to address laws and policies as we move forward. So you can see here that some Asia-Pacific countries are on track to achieve the Global AIDS Strategy 2025 targets. Yes, those targets are ambitious, but they are indeed possible. And in fact, 9 countries globally have already proven that. And we can see here that there are 4 countries in the Asia-Pacific region that are also on track to reach those treatment coverage targets, namely Cambodia, Nepal, New Zealand, and Thailand. Prevention is another story. Prevention efforts are not as powerfully being upheld, and we can only see at the moment Nepal on course to reach the target of 90% decline in new infections by 2030. When we look at India, we can see that there's also a clear path to the 2030 goal of ending AIDS, but the trajectory may not be fast enough in order to meet those goals. So annual new infections have significantly declined by 44% from 2010 to 23, but still a fifth of the estimated people living with HIV do not know their status and are not on treatment. We need far more acceleration of HIV prevention efforts here in India, whereas in annual AIDS-related deaths, we've seen a very promising decline of 79% decline from 2010 to 2023. Here, the treatment benefit is clear. One of the key approaches of the Global AIDS Strategy is U equals U. Yet this concept, this reality of treatment as prevention, is poorly leveraged and applied throughout the region and especially here in India. Of course, U equals U is undetectable equals untransmittable. And I know all of you understand this concept, but just for the sake of others, it means that a person living with HIV, if adhering to effective HIV treatment, achieves an undetectable level of the virus in their blood, then they represent zero risk of transmission of HIV to others. This is really a huge game changer, one which we have not utilized and talked nearly enough about throughout the region and here in India. There are several benefits, and reducing stigma is probably the key. HIV no longer equals death. I think we really do need to get that message out more clearly and more broadly. The diagram above highlights the potential. The prevention gains are clear, and we need to be talking about this far more across the health sector, but also publicly. If we look at the HIV testing and treatment cascade for the region, we can see where, despite substantial progress, we still have a critical gap. In the region, 78% of people living with HIV know their status, but nearly a quarter do not. And as I said before, in India, this is around 81%, and nearly 1/5 do not know their status. 67% regionally that know their HIV status are on treatment. In India, that's 71%. And regionally, 65% of those on treatment are virally suppressed. And near to that in India is 69%. The alarming point here is that in the Asia-Pacific region, nearly a third of people living with HIV are not getting the care and support they need to stay healthy and prevent transmission. The data for India on this slide shows a progressive and steady improvement over the past 5 years. But really, we still need to see a stronger push in order to reach those global targets. The testing and treatment cascade in India was around 58, 56, 40 in 2018, and it's now sitting at 81, 71, 69 in 2024. Asia Pacific has the second largest epidemic globally. For the world to end AIDS, we must get it right here in Asia and the Pacific, but also in India, because India has the second largest number of people living with HIV outside of South Africa. 1.6 million people in India living with HIV and 6.7 million people living with HIV in the Asia Pacific region. Both the AP region and India are central to the global response. As we can see here, Asia Pacific accounts for a quarter of the new infections in the world. Globally, 1.3 million new infections last year, and in the Asia Pacific region, 300,000 new infections. These graphs show the decline in new infections from 2010, and we can see that the global average of this period is a 39% decline, with the Asia Pacific region only achieving a 13% decline. We see in this next slide, India has achieved a solid 44% decline, but we still have a way to go in achieving the 90% target. The sheer number shows how critical it will be for India to make this goal. It can help carry the Asia Pacific region ahead. India accounts for 5 to 6% of global new infections and 23% of new HIV infections in the AP region alone. Perhaps the percentages don't drive the reality home enough. And so let's look at impact in terms of people's lives. Every 2 minutes in this region, one person is newly infected with HIV. Every hour, this represents 35 people newly infected, including 9 young people. Every day, 300 men who have sex with men, 80 people who inject drugs, 50 sex workers, and 15 transgender people become newly infected. Every hour, 17 people die of an AIDS-related illness, and every day we lose 9 young people between the ages of 15 to 24. Let's have a quick look at what's happening on a country-by-country basis since 2010, where you can see some marked differences between countries. The graph at the top shows the percentage change in new infections by country since 2010, and you can see that there are growing epidemics in 6 countries: Bangladesh, Laos, Papua New Guinea, Afghanistan, Fiji, and the Philippines. When we look at the mortality trends in the lower graph, we see all of these 6 countries have increasing death rates, as well as Pakistan, Indonesia, and Mongolia. HIV is concentrated among key populations and their partners. In 2022, in the Asia-Pacific region, 4 out of every 5 new infections were among key populations and their sexual partners. This translates to nearly 80% of new infections were among key populations and their sexual partners. Of this, 43% were through male-to-male sex, This is an increase of over 34% over the past 10 years. These epidemics are becoming more interconnected, and countries are seeing different dynamics emerge. Just to give a couple of examples, the Philippines has one of the fastest growing epidemics today. A near 500 to 600% increase, an epidemic largely driven by male-to-male sex and predominantly young men who have sex with men. Fiji is another example where we're seeing a dramatic 200+% increase, largely driven by intravenous drug use. A key element to these dynamics in Asia Pacific and India is related to young people. As the bottom graph shows, around a third of new infections in the region are with young people, with a number of countries seeing these rates close to or above 50%. India, not on the graph, is around 20 to 25%. The top left graph shows how dramatic these increases are for several countries. The top right graph shows how serious this is for young MSM across the region, where we have seen prevalence among young MSM double in the past 7 to 10 years. We really need to scale up innovative interventions and differentiate HIV services across the prevention and care cascade. Access to combination HIV prevention services among key populations throughout the region remains limited. Coverage is on average a mere 47% for female sex workers, 31% for men who have sex with men, and 34% for transgendered people, and only 21% for people who inject drugs. Pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP, has been available for many years, and we've had this tool available in the region, but uptake is low. India is yet to adopt and utilize. You can see from the slide here that currently in 2023, only 204,000 people are using PrEP in the region. This is well short of the regional target for 2025 of 8.2 million people. We know PrEP works. We need to take it to scale for those who need it most. We really do need to offer a range of prevention measures for all. More recently, we also have heard the great promise of long-acting injectables and the prospect of price declines that may make them more accessible going forward. When we look at treatment coverage, we can see the unequal performances, with some countries not even reaching half of the estimated people living with HIV. Most Asia-Pacific countries are in the middle, like India, but they also need to increase their pace. If we are to realise the impact treatment can have, every gap in this treatment cascade represents potential lives lost and further increases of new infections. So why do some people fail to come forward and get tested, and why do some get tested then fade back into the shadows? This brings us to the social and structural barriers that drive people away from HIV services. There are legal barriers to the response across the region, and you can see the extent of this here in the number of countries that still criminalise certain behaviours. Progress is slow, and we see few changes every year. For key populations in countries, these are the reasons to remain fearful and at arm's length of life-saving services. And you can see in this slide how this manifests into stigma and discrimination across the region. I won't take you through each of the examples, but you can really see how important U equals U is to explode the myths that HIV does not equal death. Over the past 10 years, external funding has decreased by 60%. And in the last 3 weeks, that figure has potentially increased even further. While domestic resources have increased by a significant 47%, with India funding around 95% of its national response, 12 of the 17 countries we analyse rely on international sources for more than 50% of their HIV prevention financing. This is a serious sustainability issue. This graph shows that 9 of the countries are spending less than 15% on key population-focused programming. There is clear guidance on how we should be investing those resources more effectively. The Global AIDS Strategy calls on countries to ensure that 30% of testing and treatment services should be delivered by community-led organisations. 80% of service for delivery for HIV prevention programs for key populations to be delivered by community-led organisations, and 60% of programs needed to support the achievement of societal enablers should be delivered by community-led organisations. Often a more cost-effective and impactful way to reach key populations. So the game changes, the pathway forward. We have a set of regional priorities and country priorities here in India that we feel will end inequalities and end AIDS as we move towards those 2025 targets. Let me take you through those four very quickly and just highlight a couple of them. First of all, renewing and intensifying focus on key populations. We really do need to refocus and ensure that we are targeting the right populations with the right interventions in the right places, and we are doing this at scale that will have impact. Secondly, we need to modernize service delivery. This means adopting innovations, using prevention tools to their fullest. This includes PrEP, long-term injectables, and self-testing. We need to be planning for the introduction of long-term injectables, and we need to be doing that planning now. Thirdly, eliminating barriers to equitable program coverage. So this is really addressing the enabling environment, looking at those legal and structural barriers that are fueling and continue to fuel stigma and discrimination. And fourth, mobilizing sustainable policy, program, and financing for HIV response. So really investing more in prevention and community-led programming, looking at integration and sustainability. These are key now. Countries need to look ahead and build scenarios for populations living with HIV as they age. We also need to support the integration of HIV back into the main health system without it losing some of its unique features and advantages. And finally, just a quick thanks to you and apologies that this was rather a rapid tour around the region. We will be reaching out to you in the coming months as we pivot in these difficult times to build momentum for the development of the next Global AIDS Strategy for 2026 to 2031. This will be a challenging task, and we will really need your ideas and your support to ensure we preserve the gains made in the HIV response today. Thanks again.